this is pretty amazing for a Friday. So this is pretty cool. I would have come dressed. I think I would agree. I would have come as Jane as well with the Y. If I was, okay, there we go. Okay, perfect. All right, now we are fully officially in Firefly mode. Pardon? I need lots of guns. And I need to have a much more curmudgeon-y attitude towards it. I won't steal too long, Jane. This goes back to the real Jane. But so, you know, there's actually something really remarkable happening over the next tonight and tomorrow, going all the way through Sunday. It is this incredible movement of how we are seeing what we call the great American barn raising that is happening through technologists today. And these are all of you who are coming together to say, hey, how can we rebuild America together? How do we rebuild America? There too. How do you rebuild America from the ground up through technology and data? So what's my job and what do I actually do? So my job is to advise the President and the other key staff at the White House on how do we think about data and innovation for the nation. And so our mission statement for the Chief Data Scientist has two important components. And the first way we think about it is our job is to responsibly unleash the power of data to make all Americans' lives better. And the two words that are really critical in that is first, the idea that we do it responsibly. We have really interesting questions coming about what does it mean about the responsible use of data. And the second is what does it mean if we're doing all this stuff here for all Americans? And what does it mean for problems that are with all Americans? I nearly missed my flight today. I was in a long conversation with the Vice President. And some of you may have heard recently, the Vice President is really focused on one of the most pressing issues of our time, cancer. You know, we all know somebody, a loved one, a friend who has gone through cancer. There's incredible challenges in there. And one of the most frustrating things is that we collect all this data about ourselves. We collect all this thing from sensors, from our Fitbits to our mind. You know, pick your favorite wearable. We have these electronic health records. We have all this information. But if we have that information, how are we using it? There's a good chance that the cure for cancer or different forms of diseases already exists, but it's locked up in some data silo. And our job is to figure out how to unlock that data and get it put back into the patient's hands and the researcher's hands responsibly. But we're not just thinking about it that way. We're also doing something in the policing and community service area. Some of you may have heard just a couple of weeks ago we announced the one-year anniversary of the President's Police Data Initiative. And what that does is it works with local police departments. We have 56 of them that cover more than 41 million Americans. And those 41 million, what we're doing with the population is opening up local city data on policing to encourage transparency and also the use of thinking about what are different ways we can improve the conversation on policing. One of those is what can we do for the police officers using really high quality data to keep them safe. There's a really big challenge right now in that issue as well. So we're doing things there. Another big one that's been talked about, because we're in the Science Center, that we should talk about is climate change and the conversations of the climate. The President has a great line that says he's not a climate scientist, but he knows some climate scientists. Turns out that was my research for many, many years. So I will tell you that it is one of the most pressing challenges that we face. On our military bases, the naval bases in particular, we're having to change up where things are actually on the military bases because of how the water is coming in from rising sea levels and tides and other aspects as well. Another big one where we're focused on are diseases. Anybody heard recently about Zika? Yeah, Zika's coming. It's going to be a real issue and we need to get ahead of it. One of the ways we understand these issues is through the use of data, bringing it in, studying it, understanding it, watching the trends, and figuring out how this all ties together. But it's one of the most powerful things that we're seeing. If there's one place that we're seeing data take over and change the landscape of the entire world, it's happening at the local layer. It's happening at the local cities, where the cities are deciding to figure out what can you do with data at your local place. It could be something as simple as identifying where potholes are. It could be thinking about how do you get the right educational opportunities to the right people. It could be figuring out about how to get bus maps or other types of things connected with the local public. Those type of things is where we are seeing this literal force multiplier through technologies. And I've had the good fortune of building some interesting companies, everywhere from eBay, PayPal, Skype, and most recently a company that some of you may have heard of called LinkedIn. So when we were building those companies, one of the things we always focused on is how do we maximize the return of data to provide a great outcome for the user. If we can do that when we build a social networking site, why can't we do that for our local town, for our local people? What prevents us from figuring out how to basically take food that might be left over from a restaurant or some other place and get it to people in need? How do we use data to tackle the opioid crisis and drug epidemic that we're seeing? How do we think about using data to address homelessness or getting veterans into the jobs when they come back from a tour of duty? All those things aren't sort of hand-wavy, wishy-washy things. Those are things that are happening right now, today, and they're really happening at the local layer in the towns. One of the reasons I'm here at St. Louis is the open data movement here that we've been hearing about today, that you guys have been working on for literally the last 4 years. All the hackathons have been happening out here, the great universities, you've got federal facilities, you've got everything that comes together. It's just an incredible thing. You also have some pretty good ribs and some really awesome fried chicken. We were just out there today, so always a good excuse to come out. But that's really the genesis of it. There's one thing that I will tell you that the president singularly focuses on above anything else. It's how do we use data and technology in radical, novel ways to provide new solutions for every single person. And what I would encourage all of you, anybody that's in technology, please take the sense of that we should consider a technology neither radical nor revolutionary unless it benefits every single American. If we adopt that stance, we will find a really different way of thinking about the world. And that's really all I wanted to talk about, but I'm happy to answer any questions about from life in the White House to why we're building certain things certain ways. Yeah?
So I don't know how familiar you are,
Testing. Hello. Hi, my name is Peter. So you were talking to the Vice President about his new cancer initiative. I don't know how familiar you are with CA-BIG.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So they recently did an autopsy sort of on CA-BIG, and there's a lot of code that went into CA-BIG over, I guess like 2005 to 2000.
Yeah, it's about 7 years.
Right. So how much of that, because I know that a lot of it was based on sort of like open source licensing and stuff, what happened to the code, and is it going to be used in the next iteration of whatever comes next?
So this is a really interesting question. So just for some context, the people, the group that produces the most data in the world and gives it back to everybody else is the U.S. government. And we have everything from the Weather Service data, and the weather data, we really interact with the weather data through an icon on our phone. But it's got petabytes of data, it's got the world's most powerful supercomputers on it, and they're crunching all this data to get you something. There's census data, there's another set of data sets that exist in the healthcare space. There's systems like dbGaP, which has data from DNA snippets and all these other type of really great data sets. One that is also out there is that National Cancer Institute talked about is the one that has been proposed, which is the Genomic Data Commons. which is really kind of building a framework for all of these type of things to empower anybody to work on this. And one of the coolest things that we have a science fair at the White House. And we just had one recently. It was pretty amazing. We had a 6-year-old girl and her sister, who was 8. They literally launched a toy cat into space with a GoPro. It's really, really remarkable. In there, we also had a young lady who is working on renal failure and trying to come up with new ways to think about renal failure. She's 17. Renal failure costs us as taxpayers $30 billion a year, but worse is it dramatically impacts a large number of Americans' lives. So one of those other ones that we had last year is a kid named Nathan Hahn, and he was using one of these data sets with machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out new tumor sites and cancer aspects as well. The framing that we're thinking of all these projects going forward is there is data and there's compute. And there's a code that kind of underlies the foundation of all of this. We have a federal government, we have now made a commitment that 20% of all code that the government brings in must be open source. But in particular, the code that supports science and all these things must, if they're funded by federal dollars, they must go back out into the open. And so we are working with the National Institute for Health, Cancer, all these other ones to figure out how do you do that in a responsible way. So it's coming. Some of those ones that are older, you don't see it because they're going to get leapfrogged by these new programs that are about to come into place. Yeah. We have to redact that. Where's that button for the Tesla one?
Hi, we met earlier. I'm starting work on a project that I hope in the future would enable more people to request civic data and share it with other people in their own community in order to create more empowerment for them to be able to become more involved in their communities. And what I've noticed is that a lot of times when I discuss this with people, I mention FOIA and Sunshine Law, and a lot of times they say, well, I didn't know I could request that. That seems like a lot of data to be able to handle things like how much people get paid, the kinds of property information that are available. So obviously there's data sets that are underutilized, and I'm wondering if, in your experience when dealing with civic data particularly, is there a particular type of data or set of data that you think could be much better utilized if more people think of it as available, or if it were made available in a machine-readable format, online, open data, something more accessible?
Boy, there's so much goodness in that question. So the first is, the president signed, because we deal with this at the federal layer, not just the local layer. So the president said, hey, we have all this data, why aren't we giving it back to Americans? It's all of our data. So he signed what's called an executive order. The executive order says all agencies must do this. And that executive order says by default, all data the United States of America produces at the federal level must be open and machine readable by default. So unless there's a national security concern or privacy issue, it must be open. And by machine readable, we don't mean PDF, like we mean real machine readable. And so that's where we got data.gov, and we've got about the 200,000 data sets. At the local level, there's two interesting things that we see happen. And there's actually in many ways analogous to the federal. The first time is when a data set is open, the number one user is not the public. It's another part of the government to make government work more efficiently for you. That's the number one user. Second is a lot of the data that is FOIA, or people are trying to request it, they're calling it over and over again. They want that data back. Well, why? Because they have a business, or they have some reason that they need that data, and the only way to get it is by asking for it through FOIA. If instead of going through the FOIA process, we just open up that data in the format that the people want to use to build something, we're going to take all the costs that are going to go through the FOIA process and direct it to allowing people to innovate. And that's what we literally mean when we say unleashing the power of data. And so the way to do that in this, if you're asking the specific data sets that I personally think are going to be unlocking the greatest yield for us in the near future, I mean, one is healthcare data. That is going to be revolutionary. We're seeing it on the president, now the vice president is leading the charge on the cancer moonshot. The president announced not this year's, but the previous year's State of the Union, what's called the Precision Medicine Initiative, which takes all of the ideas to combine our genomic information with our electronic health records responsibly and safely, so we can unlock this idea of having tailored treatments. We get customized eyeglasses when we go to a doctor. Why don't we get customized treatment plans rather than a tablet that is sort of more generic? Especially important when we get to cancer. So that area. Policing data, phenomenal opportunity. But also in there, we're seeing great opportunity for everything from what are the wait times for ambulances? What is the response function? I'll tell you a really cool one, because there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence today. Artificial intelligence, we all think of it as like, oh, we're gonna create the fake computer brain, and the brain is gonna take over the world. We actually think of artificial intelligence as what we call specialized artificial intelligence, which is, think of it like a self-driving car. And one of the applications that we saw, thank you very much. So with the self-driving, one of the most powerful applications we're seeing with AI, what happened is in Charlotte Mecklenburg, is they took a look at all the excessive force data from the police department. And they used the same algorithms they do in trying to determine what type of ad to show you. And you know what they found out? There's first a very small number of bad officers. Those officers that are bad all have in common the usual things. Repeated accidents, kind of track record of stuff. But then they find an interesting other set. Did that officer respond to a domestic violence incident where a child was present? Did they respond to a suicide call? And what they found is, what they're doing is an officer responds to a highly emotionally charged incident, and then we go, dispatch puts them back out on the street. So, who is the system failing? We are not doing right by the officers that are putting their lives on the line every day. You know, you go through one of these incidents, highly emotionally charged, you pull somebody over, they're flippant with you. No good human can go through that. So as a result, what they realize is they need to modify the dispatch system using that data to figure out what's happening. And that's using these AI techniques. They're now going to start trials to deploy 4 officers to domestic violence incidents, because they now know that that is highly likely, that a fight's going to break out or something bad is going to happen. But who are the people that are doing that? It's the people in the local town. It's the people in the city who have decided that to work with their local police department and say, hey, I've got tech skills, I got design skills, I can work on this, I'm going to figure out how to help them. This was not the problem they were looking to solve, it's a problem that emerged by working with them through that open data. But equally, the homeless opportunity is phenomenal. There's something that we just announced is phase 2 of the Opportunity Project, which is working with groups like Zillow, Redfin, and others to think about how do we take these regular consumer products like Yelp and all these things you thought about, and think about it for a persona that is someone that's a domestic violence victim, a persona of a veteran. How do these services get them the help they need? All of that is really driven at the local layer. And it is when it works properly is when the people in the city say, this is what this product needs to look like to support my community. That's the level of fidelity we're getting at, and that's where the data fundamentally transforms us. I'll repeat it.
You mentioned open source. There seems to be a lot of government software that is critical, but is proprietary. So I think of voting software in the computer science community is really frightened about how that can be changed.
Right, the open source.
So-
You want to recap it real quick? So,
Yes, the conflict in the public sphere between proprietary software, that is commercial software, and open source software, particularly where software is critical for the public good. And voting software has been back and forth and still, I think, really up in the air. Another one that I've just become involved with is computer forensic software.
Yes.
Proprietary, hidden, and yet people are going to jail or going free because of the computer forensic. And so, can you comment a little bit? It sounded like you were saying nice things about open source there at the federal government. Can you comment on how that may help the public good?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. So there's a few things. So let's talk online voting. That's a great one. There's lots of great questions there. So my partner in crime and one of the other deputy CTOs for the president is a guy named Ed Felton. Ed Felton is the Princeton professor who showed the flaws on this. And so Ed is part of the White House team with me, specifically working on these issues. And because we feel very strongly about the empowerment of every American through this process. And if things are hidden behind an algorithm, what are the implications? Megan Smith, Cecilia Munoz, and myself just released to the president a major report from the White House on big data and the intersection, the risks and the opportunities with civil rights in these aspects. And the specific one that was just described by ProPublica is an interesting case of how technology is coming in as a vendor solution for assessing risk in the criminal justice system. And so how do they allocate bail? And there's very disturbing analysis in there that shows African Americans are disproportionately impacted by the algorithm. There's not transparency in this. So there's a process that we're encouraging, which we call fairness by design. How do we build these algorithms and this data so that they are transparent from design, even when much of it may be proprietary? What is the model for testing and evaluating this throughout there, especially as we're seeing the wave of artificial intelligence happening? On June 7th in Washington, D.C., and this will be live streamed, will be what's called the Artificial Intelligence for Good workshop that is led with the White House. And what we're doing is asking exactly the kind of questions that you're talking about there. Open source, and why we are committed to open source for at least 20% of all federal software to be open source at this stage, is to ensure that we are getting the maximum return on all of our dollars for the procurement process and all the things that are happening, but also allowing businesses to return on their investment as a business as well, finding that right balance over time. But making it purely open source still doesn't take into account the process of processing the data through the algorithm. And so we're thinking about what does that holistically need to look like, especially as the algorithms become more and more bespoke and black box, where they're hidden from you and you just get an outcome. And so and the reason I'm belaboring this point is because what you are raising is going to be such a critical challenge for us as we head into this next wave of technology that we're working on. Because, you know, at the basic level, you know, you might pull open your phone app to figure out how the fastest way to get to work is. I might pull it up, but we're making the assumption that what you see and I see, if we start at the same place, should be the same. We make that assumption. We make the assumption that if I'm going online to buy something, you and I should see the similar prices. We make a lot of these assumptions. We also are living in a world that is increasingly becoming a digital fabric. And the reason this is going to be so, it's actually going to be most important for the kids your age, your kind of kids, because in this world where we live in a digital fabric, our fabric of a society right now, when we have breaks and tears in our fabric, people fall in those cracks, they get hurt, they get harmed, we story tell about it, we fix policy, we fix rules, we come up with social services. What happens when the fabric of society becomes digital? When you are coming out of active military service into a veteran and you show up at a VA facility and it says you're not in the system, who do you turn to? We say, well, it's not in the system. Now, it turns out that the U.S. Digital Service has been fast on that problem, and now it's really resolved. But this type of problem can happen everywhere in there. Somebody says, well, that's what it says in the computer. How are we supposed to challenge that? What is that supposed to look like with the rights to our rights as a public? And how do we make sure that we're staying on top of this so for our kids and our kids' kids that we're setting a model of what the civil society contract that our founding fathers put into place is the same social contract that we have with the transformation of society. And it is such a great component that you're raising there. It's one that we need to address in every part of the process, from the most local layer all the way to the federal layer.
Hi, I teach computer science, so I guess I'm seeing as almost with all these data, we might have a huge gap between the amount of people who can work on these data versus what the amount of data that is there. So I guess my question is two-part. One, what are we doing trying to close that gap? But even more so, being a mom of two girls who does not think it's cool to be computer scientists. Again, we still have that gap. So how are we also going to bring the girls into this?
Yeah. So a number of things there. So the first is in the President's State of the Union address, this latest State of the Union address, the President called that we need to have computer science available to every single child in America. So what we call CS for all. And that is the very foundational building block of the nation that we have to empower every single child with that opportunity. The second one, which is fascinating, there's a picture in the West Wing right now that actually just got moved from the West Wing to one of my colleagues' office, and it shows around the President has a table inside the Oval Office, and it shows around that table a number of women's legs with their high heels, or just heels, and that is all those heels. That is the President's security team. If you look around the cabinet, and I look around, we have a senior staff meeting in the White House every morning in the Roosevelt Room, and I look around the room. There's every gender, there's every ethnicity, there's every race represented around the table, and it starts with that. In our leadership layers, we have to have that. We have to establish that. The U.S. CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for the United States of America, Megan Smith, one of my closest friends and colleagues, is a top-tier technologist, a woman, and also a lesbian. It's phenomenal. We have people in every opportunity. We also have a problem of systemic bias that we have to address. And having spent the last 10 years building companies in Silicon Valley, I will tell you that that is a real issue. The great news is that the federal system, if you look at what we call our tech teams, if you will, the career ones as well as some of the ones that have come in, is some of the most diversified technologist workforce that's there. The CTO, I was just on a call this morning with the CTO of New York City, a well-known entrepreneur in artificial intelligence. She's phenomenal. So we have to start with modeling it. We start by living it ourselves and doing it ourselves. You're doing it as a professor of computer science. The other part, though, that is in there is we also have to enable it, making it easier for everyone to do something. And that part of making it easier stems from opening up more data, making it cheaper, taking legacy systems where the data is locked up, figuring out how to get that out of there, putting it out there on the web, asking people to do more. And then really these hackathons are one of the most important things. I wrote a post a few years ago because people were talking about how do you get an internship in Silicon Valley. People were really getting frustrated because the only way to get a top-tier internship in Silicon Valley was you have to go to a well-known school, you have to have the pedigree, you have to have all the things. And I was just recently talking to a young woman who she came into her computer science class. She hadn't had a lot of computer science before, freshman, and all the young men around her had had 4 years of coding because they'd been playing Minecraft and all those other things. And it was a very disempowering aspect. She just had to stay with it. She needed a lot of coaching. she is 10 times better than all her peers right now. She's that good. But in that, one of the things I point out to people is, instead of trying to get an internship at just a Silicon Valley company, you can make your own internship. You could go to hackathons every day during the summer. You could win prizes, you could win money, you could be sitting together with different types of people, and you will learn more than you will ever imagine, not only about technology, but about working as a team and working with people. And that is one of the coolest things that we can do today, is that you can show off what you built, whether you put it on a system like GitHub, open source somewhere else, or whatever, show it off, build it up, get in front of an audience. That's a transformative experience that didn't exist a decade ago. And so for the kids being able to do this, and we're seeing them do this at a younger and younger age, it's incredibly empowering. I mean, the age of kids at the White House Science Fair, there was literally a girl there that went to my junior high. And I was talking to her, I was like, she was telling me all the stuff she was doing, and she handed me her business card. And I was like, I don't know what I was doing at that age. But it's phenomenal, that transformation. And I tell people this all the time, like, if you question the power of the United States of America when it wants to solve a problem, and you bring the full force of the United States of America to solve a problem, and you want to see what that looks like, go hang out at a hackathon, go hang out with some kids at a science fair, come here, hang out with the kids that you guys probably have here during the summer, and you will see what really keeps America great. It is that level of innovation. You talk to all these other countries that I get to, from China to you name it, and you ask them for what they're trying to figure out, that's what they're trying to figure out, is how do we empower, how do they get what we have with our youth? How do we do that? That is the secret sauce that we're seeing, that I can tell you has been the singular takeaway for me being at the White House and watching this across the entire country.
I relate to that young lady that was sitting in a computer science class.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah. I was lucky enough that even though I went through that being by myself, I went through launch code and ended up getting a paid apprenticeship and getting a job at MasterCard. So that was awesome. But thank you. Thank you. But when I hear you talk about data science, it's like this kind of hot new trend that everybody's looking at. If I'm looking at people like myself that are, interested in it, where do I begin? Where do I start?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So I was just up at MasterCard last week.
Yeah.
And one of the things we were talking about is some of the very cool philanthropic work that MasterCard is thinking about is what does it mean to leverage the data they have or a company has as an organization to do really cool things. And that's the case. So, so just as a little bit of background, so I get sometimes some of the credit and a lot of the blame for coining this term data scientist. And it was a term that Jeff Hammerbacher and I came up with when we were building both Facebook and LinkedIn, because we didn't know what to name our teams. So that's what we kind of came up with. The reason I think the term has taken off is because no one knows what it means. And so it's a great empowering thing. But think about it for a second, because we're here in a science place. So if you think about the most powerful scientific model that we all take to heart at the end of the day, it's Star Trek. Right? And what does Star Trek singularly have? First generation, right? We're legit here. First generation Star Trek. What do they have on the bridge? They have Spock. Right? Here Kirk is. It's a bad day. There's the Romulans. Oh, it's a really bad day. The Klingons are here too. Oh crap. We got 40 minutes to save the universe. And what's the first thing he says? Spock, what do you think? Spock's answer, one of two words. Curious or fascinating. So why is it that we have built a model for businesses where we have a boardroom, which is their version of the bridge, and there's no Spock? This is the transformation that we're actually seeing. Jeff Immelt, as he transformed GE in this latest wave, so one of the first things that we're talking about is how do we get the data people in there? We have to shorten the chain of information. We have to make that faster. And you don't get to be on the bridge just because you're the data whiz or the science whiz. You get to be there because you actually saved the ship. You earn your seat every day at the bridge. That's what enabled the president to create a chief data scientist. That is why so many of the federal agencies, Secretary Pritzker at the Department of Commerce has a chief data scientist. The National Institute for Health has one. The Department of Transportation has one. And it goes on and on and on. We in fact have a data cabinet for the White House now. All those people are coming together. So what does it take to get involved in this field? I mean, I started my career off in community college. I started off as a near math dropout. I barely got through high school. My doctor's in mathematics, working on atmospheric systems. But it's because I was playing with data that got me through. The coolest thing now is you can go onto data.gov, you can download any of these almost 200,000 data sets, start playing. But more importantly, if I was going to do something now today, is I would take a data set that you have context around your local city. Policing data, homeless data, potholes, whatever it is. Pick whatever thing is fascinating you and start playing with it. Great data set that CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, released on opioid use. Where are they being overprescribed? Those kind of things, if you start playing with it and working with others, the only rule of thumb about data science and the way to do it wrong is to do it solo. If you do it solo, you will fail. Data science is a team sport. If a few of you partner up and you play with it, you'll go fast. Doesn't matter if you use R, Python, Excel, Tableau, SAS, Stata, Abacus. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you are together. There, equally as much as there is in the figuring out of the analysis, there's asking what question is valuable, and more so is the storytelling of how to communicate something about data. Data analysis without context has no value. Data science, data analysis without a human in the loop is being data stupid. It's literally that you're avoiding, and by the way, if you don't believe me that's true, go type into your favorite search engine, GPS and cliff, and see how many people actually will drive off a cliff because they listen to the GPS over the windshield. It's shocking how bad it is. It's actually terrifying. But that kind of putting all that together is, if you start playing with it, is a phenomenal thing. And what I think the data science title allows you to be, doesn't matter if you're a designer, engineer, mathematician, statistician, economist, whatever it is, it empowers you to do those things. You can take data science courses, they're online, they're in schools, they're all those things. The other component that I've called for is every single person that is formally trained in any of these programs inside the United States must have ethics as part of the core curriculum. Because it's exactly of this case that you're talking about. It is every single one of them has to know, and it's not some elective, it has to be intrinsic inside there. Just as we're calling for every computer science training course, must have security now at this point in time, tied and bundled in there, not as an elective. Even if you're an electrical engineer, you must be thinking about cybersecurity, because a weakness in one part of the infrastructure causes a cascading failure throughout the whole system. But playing with it, and it's such a great time, it's so easy to start. The salaries are pretty good, I think. Yeah?
Hi, my name's Brett Castillo. I was actually one of the co-founders of OPENDATASTL 3 years ago now, I think. So I started out working for St. Louis County during that time. I actually worked at a startup for a while with these guys in the front row here. I'm working private sector now and picking up even more. And you start out private sector and now working government. And I come to realize that just like the private sector where you tend to pick up new skills, new capabilities as you move around between companies and organizations, that's not hitting local government. you tend to end up with the same people frozen in the same place. You can't be competitive with the private sector to bring new people in. One of the most amazing things I saw, I went to the Mid-American GIS conference out in Kansas City a few weeks ago, and the Geographic Information Officer for Arkansas specifically got enough money to recruit basically an Amazon expert out of the private sector, and in a year revolutionized everything they did. So what do you think needs to happen next, especially like where can the federal government help facilitate the idea of bringing basically hiring employment practices in local and state government into what happens in the private sector and being able to get this exchange of skills and abilities to modernize more?
Yeah, St. Louis is bringing the heat. This is good. So, yeah, how do we bring people in? So one of the things that there is this narrative of, you know, Silicon Valley's got to come to save government. What people forget, so I started off as an academic, then I went to the Department of Defense. What people miss about the big data movement is all the big data people came from the Department of Defense. We came from the national security apparatus after 9/11. And what we saw is we said, hey, all these other problems, we've thought about this, we actually have some ideas around this. Network analysis, all these other things. So we all kind of came from this world. And Silicon Valley disproportionately benefited from feds going in this way. Where we have not, and now what we're realizing is we need to make that world more transparent and people going in and out. The president set up the U.S. Digital Service, set up 18F to allow technologists to come into the federal government for what he calls a tour of duty. And we want to really make sure that this is a model that people don't say, hey, I have to have a career. You can come in for a while. And by the way, recruiting for the U.S. federal government, we compete with the best of them. Because why? There's nothing better than waking up in the morning knowing that you're part of something bigger. There's nothing more powerful than that. There's nothing more powerful than mission. Why do we work for a startup? There's a mission, right? We have a desire to focus on the mission, and all the other things have to align with it. I also can tell you concretely with the data that in the first 10 years of any person's career, you will change job more often than anybody of your cohort did 2 years before, 4 years before. In other words, every generation that comes forward changes jobs more frequently. Doesn't matter if you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, international. So the world is just shifting to that model. People want a model of a tour of service. One of my best friends, Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, he talked about this in his last book. And that is that idea. How do we do that? We're seeing that now start to shift into the local cities, but it's not happening fast enough. And what the problem is that's easier happening in the large metropolitan areas. So, you know, New York has done this, LA has done this, Philly has done this. We need that to happen across all of America and figuring out how to bind that together. That's why the Code for American Brigades are so important in other aspects. But the other thing is how do we enable it so that you can take a leave of absence from your startup or your career to come work on a thing or do it on a part-time basis. One of the powerful ones that we're finding for police departments is they're bringing in part-time technologists to work on this problem along with the traditional technologists because they don't have enough bandwidth to do these things. Or they're having to negotiate a cloud contract. I had a chief of police who literally told me, he's like, hey, I know how to negotiate for tires and other equipment. I don't know, like, what is this cloud thing? And how am I supposed to negotiate this? That's not supposed to be his job. Even something simple as body cameras, they need help. So we got to help them that way and make that more transparent. And we are committed to doing that, and the president has established that, including what is another executive order on what's called the Presidential Innovation Fellows, that makes it permanent that you can come in as a fellow to the government for 1 year and work on things. Some of those fellows are well known. You know, we have the creator, founder of Weather Underground, Alan Sternberg. He was a fellow. We've had others. One of the other people that have come into U.S. Digital Service founder of Twilio, which just filed for their IPO, people like that. Todd Park was a previous CTO. Todd has founded two $1 billion companies, which make much more than $1 billion companies in the healthcare ecosystem. So we have a lot of great people, but the ones we don't talk about are also all the career feds who are doing unbelievable transformative work in ridiculously amazing ways, from child trafficking, domestic violence, veterans benefits, unlocking the careers for cancer. These career feds are doing astonishing work, and they do not get the credit they deserve or the limelight that we should bestow upon them for the effort that they, and the service that they provide. So all I'll do is I'll hang out for a little while, but thanks for paying attention to this issue. And if there's one thing I would ask you to do is, each one of you literally has the ability to be a force multiplier and change the course of trajectory for your local town and city through the skill sets you have. You just have to ask and come in and get into the door and show them what that world looks like. It will be significant bang head against wall, but once you figure out how to communicate and talk, you will change the trajectory. So thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? I have a question for you.
Oh, one more.
So you mentioned ethics and transparency, speed of getting the data to the people, and then translating that data. So is there any government civilian oversight? Is the government accountant agency involved? Anything like that to get this done properly?
Yeah, all of it goes through the traditional congressional oversight vehicles. Through GAO, the traditional appropriations process and everything, including now what is there is a federal chief privacy counsel to ensure that side of the whole argument as well, to make sure that that's put into place legally. And Congress just established a new group commission on evaluation to think about policy evaluations of the use of these data and how to think about all those aspects that are tied together for that purpose, to ensure there's no nefarious or funny business that's happening at the data layer or throughout that process. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.